My name is Federico Fernández, and I'm part of the Austrian Economic Center. And I have the honor and the privilege to be the moderator of this panel, which is titled Freedom versus Governance. And unfortunately, that's in many cases that's what happens. Governance is against freedom. It should be freedom and governance, but we really know that most of the times is not the case, and we will probably be discussing why it's not the case. I will shortly introduce our three speakers. I will commit basically a crime because the three of them have very large CVs and very interesting lives, and I will summarize them very shortly. I'm sorry. Call the police if you want, and they can detain me as soon as the panel finishes. No problem, because what I'm about to do, I acknowledge, is a crime. I'll start. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you. You're always to protect and serve. I'll start with Gloria very briefly. Gloria, her academic studies. She studied at Universidad Francisco Marroquín in Guatemala, where the country she's from. She studied international relationships and political sciences. She's author of several books. It's interesting. She has a very dynamic duo of books, which is How to Talk to a Progressive, and very recently, I don't know if it's published already or still. May 21. In a month, she's going to publish How to Talk to a Conservative. And by the way, I saw the cover. The picture of the cover, it's very interesting. It's a pity we don't have a PowerPoint with that. But anyway, and Gloria is a force of nature. She has done a lot to fight populism in Latin America. She's currently living in Mexico and has also some projects going on in the US, particularly with Reason and John Stossel. Second, John Chisholm. John is a very experienced entrepreneur. He's a pioneer in online marketing. Today he's the CEO of John Chisholm's Ventures, a startup advisory and an angel investing group. And very importantly, he's the author of an amazing book that all of us should read, but particularly young people. And Barbara, she's having it here, and we're going to circulate it so you can take a look. And the one who tweets or publishes on Instagram or Facebook more about this event with this hashtag will get this copy as a gift from John. So we believe in incentives, and so start tweeting, start posting on Instagram, and you can get this magnificent book. The book's title, by the way, is Unleash Your Inner Company. And well, John will say a few words about the book, I'm sure, but it's a magnificent way for you to discover what's your passion and how to start your company, and doing it with passion and with success. And last but definitely not least, Karl-Peter Schwarz. He's as profession journalist. He holds a degree in history and Roman philology. Just to mention a few of the things he has done between 2007 and 2017, he was the foreign correspondent for Central and South Europe for the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, which is probably the most important German newspaper. And it's great. He has great expertise, particularly in this area of the world, so it's going to be fantastic to have him. And he published also a very good book on the separation between the Czech Republic and Slovakia in the beginning of the 90s, after the wall fell. So without further ado, I leave the floor to Gloria. Each speaker will be speaking around 15 minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. Prepare your questions, because I'm very lazy and I don't want to ask any, so I hope you ask many questions, and I have to do as little as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you very much for all the organizers of the Free Market Roadshow. It's the second time that I've been touring with them, and it's a pleasure for me to be here in Moldova. I never in my life thought that I was going to be here. As Federico said, I'm from Guatemala. My dad is Cuban. My mom is half Hungarian. My grandfather was from just around the corner from Transylvania, and my grandma was from Guatemala. So I have a little bit of familiar experience with, communist regimes and totalitarianism and dictatorships and, your family having to go out and find a new way. I want to start because we're going to talk about freedom versus governance. So I want to start with an exercise. So you're welcome to join if you want. If you would please stand up. We're going to do an exercise where I'm going to try to show you what's the difference between freedom versus governance, okay? So with the hand that you write, if you are right, put it like this in front of you with your point finger. If you write with your left, then do it with your left, okay? Then with the hand that you don't write, put it behind your elbow, right? And then you're going to do this. You're going to turn around as much as you can, like do a little bit of yoga with your waist as much as you can. And please don't kill each other, but once you do it, try to focus on the point that you can see as far as you can go with your waist. You have to turn around in the same sense of the hand that you write. So if you write with your right hand, you turn to your right as much as you can. Stretch that waist. And if you write with your left, you go on your left side and you stretch. Once you're there, please be quiet and watch the point. Focus on the wall, focus on someone's hair, but focus on the point that you can see when you stretch the most you can. Focus on that point. Do you have it there? Envision it. Now return and close your eyes. Close your eyes and try to think of the point that was a little bit farther than the point you saw. What was further that your waist couldn't go there? Your eyes could see it, but you couldn't go there. Once you envision it, put your hand again in the same way that you had it, and put the other hand below your elbow. And now stretch again, as much as you can. Stretch again. Okay? Stretch. How many of you are a little bit further than you were before? Can you raise your hand? Thank you very much. So, the first, you can sit down. So, freedom versus governance. The first exercise you did is governance. Is the established. Is I cannot go further. This is what it is. Freedom is what happens when you envision, when you're closing your eyes and you envision that you can go further. Not everyone can do it, but the majority of humanity can. So when you put yourself in a vision, you can go further than before. This is what explains that today in the 21st century, humanity lives more than 100 years, that we have quality of life, that we don't die like our previous cavemen died at 18 years old because of a tooth or an injury. So the main difference between freedom and governance is the ability of the human brain to innovate with the things that have existed in this planet since its beginning. If we think of planet Earth, it is a blue ball that has been around for 4.5 trillion years. I don't even know what's the translation in English, but it's like 4.5 thousand millions of years. Always this planet has had relatively the same amount of resources, the same minerals, gases, water. wild nature that has evolved in different animals and different plants. So if the planet has always had the same resources, what has made the difference in the fact that our previous cavemen lived until 18 years old and only had fire and a little bit of, like very rustic homes, and the fact that today we have airplanes, internet, cell phones, microphones, universities, philosophy, mathematics, physics, where all this came from? Did some aliens arrive and put it all here? No, right? It came from the only resource unlimited in this planet. Can you think of what that resource is? The human brain. Thank you very much. It is. The human brain, as far as we know, is the only computer capable of grabbing the resources that have existed in this planet for millions of years and transform it in a microphone or a cell phone. The minerals inside the things that we have today are the same minerals that the dinosaurs stepped on millions and millions of years ago. But what is the thing about the human brain? The thing about the human brain, in order to innovate, is that it needs to be free to read, to experiment, to try, to defy, to debate, the freedom to adventure into paths that no one else has adventured before. In order to do that, it is impossible to have a totalitarian regime that restricts you from trading, traveling, reading, thinking, or expressing yourself. I want to ask you, because you're all from a country that was previously part of a totalitarian regime. How many of you have grandfathers or grandmothers or fathers or mothers or big brothers who think that things were way better under the Soviet Union? Raise your hand. At least one relative that thinks things were better before. Okay? There are a few hands. How many of you have relatives that say, no, things are better now? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you have watched the movie Goodbye Lenin? Yeah? Do you know that movie? When the mom gets like a heart attack when the Coca-Cola sign is dropped off in East Germany. So here's the thing. There are two wolves, the Chinese say, inside every human person. There's the wolf of conformity and there's the wolf of daring. And it depends in each of us which wolf do we want to feed. Some people feed more their wolf of conformity. They like to trade their freedom for some security. I don't care if everyone else is poor, as long as there's equality, so I'd rather have a government telling me what to trade with who, what to read, and what to think. Some humans have more of a tendency to be conform. Some other humans have the tendency to say, no, you know what? Even if I commit mistakes, because that's part of freedom, screwing up is part of experimenting and innovating, I rather have my own decisions. I don't want anyone else taking decisions for me. Now, the constant tension throughout human history is between these two wolves. Collectivism and totalitarianism trying to control the individual, and individuals like Freddie Mercury saying, I want to break free. Okay? So, the main issue is that for conformists and collectivists to exist, they must annihilate the freedom of the ones who don't. I don't have a problem with socialists. If someone wants to be socialist, if they think that money is evil and private property is the worst, good for you. But man, grab your stuff, go to live in a hippie community, and leave us alone to the ones who want to trade, to the ones who want to have a free market. The problem is that for collectivists to exist, they always steal the 3 human basic rights of the people who don't want to be in that regime. Those rights are life, private property, and freedom. Private property people think, oh, helicopters, Ferraris, yachts. But in fact, you are born with your most 2 important private properties. And with those 2, you can then acquire the rest of them. Can someone think what are those 2 private properties that you're born with? Sorry? Your character? Okay, yes. And that is embodied in your human brain. Your brain is your first private property. It is like a computer, okay? The day you're born, it's like, ding, welcome, you know? And the software starts. And the software starts acquiring knowledge, the kind words of your mother, movies, books, your memories, your first kiss, your first heartbreak. Everything is stored in your brain until the day you die. So if you have a government that controls your brain by telling you, you cannot travel, you cannot read, you cannot trade, you cannot innovate, they expropriate the most important of your private property. And the second of your private property is your body. Your body is the vehicle that without it, your brain would be just like a, like a jelly mash moving around the floor. Thanks to your body, you can absorb reality. With your eyes, you can see how reality is. With your ears, you can listen to what other people have to say. With your mouth, you can express your ideas. With your hands, you can transform those minerals in things that didn't exist before. When the government tells you that you cannot eat some products or you cannot trade, they also expropriate your body. So expropriations from totalitarian regimes, let it be Nazism, fascism, or communism, do not start when they seize companies. They start way before, when they start expropriating your brain and your body, right? So in order for you to understand that human history is always cyclical, this is a battle that is never quite won and is never quite lost. And we don't have to be as arrogant to think that we are going to be the generation that will change everything for everyone forever. No. We have to be humble enough to understand that the battle of ideas is something that has been going on for thousands of years. And here, our friends from Spain brought you this amazing brochure about trench libertarianism. And this is what we have to do. It is about the battle of ideas in order for freedom to always overcome government. It's not the violent battle. It's not about blood. It's not about killing. I hate when people praise Che Guevara and they say, oh, what a revolutionary. Excuse me, there's nothing revolutionary in killing someone that thinks different from you. That is the thing that we've done for centuries. There's no revolutionary thing about that. You know what's revolutionary? Putting all the information of humanity in people's hands, like in a cell phone. Upcoming with ideas on how we're going to take out the plastic that we have in the seas. Finding new medicines to cure disease. That is revolutionary. And in order for those revolutions that enhance human life and enhance prosperity to exist, freedom must always overcome the totalitarian dictatorship of governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you very much. I'm sure your speech sparked lots of interest. Before giving the floor to John, just a quick reminder, today here at ASEM, it's also going on the European Resource Bank meeting. Barbara mentioned it at the beginning, but it's good to remind people again. We start at 2 p.m. downstairs, and it's here. It's here. Good. Even better. It's here at 2 p.m. and it's going to be a very interesting event with people from all around Europe. And you can even come Saturday morning again and enjoy, it is a great plan for young people particularly, but there will be a workshop by Gloria, Ignasi Volto, who is back there, and Luis Iglesias about communication. There's going to be lots of things. So if you're interested, you're more than welcome to join us. John, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Bună dimineața. Gloria, that was so powerful and inspiring. Thank you for that. I can't wait for your workshop. Is everybody tweeting or Instagramming using the hashtag Free Market Roadshow? Okay, I see one person. Remember, the book is to be won by somebody who has the most postings on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, whatever. So please post with this hashtag. Many of the ideas that I'll be sharing with you just now are from the book, Unleash Your Inner Company. It's primarily a guide to entrepreneurship, but it also has advice for policymakers. I like to say it contains as many of the mistakes as I've made over the last 25 years, starting, growing, and selling companies, as I was able to squeeze into 400 pages. It's not all of the mistakes I've made, but it's a representative sample. You know much more about Moldova and Europe than I do. For the last 40 years, I've lived not here in Europe, but in a very exciting place, Silicon Valley in Northern California. I've worked at large companies and small. I've started 3 companies of my own. I've invested in many others. Some of them have succeeded, some have failed. So I've had very long exposure to Silicon Valley, and it seems to me that its growth and innovation over the last century and increasing dysfunction over the last decade, which is less well known, contain some lessons that may be useful for Moldova and Europe. Let's see how. So first of all, Silicon Valley in the early 20th century attracted entrepreneurs to the west coast of the United States, 3,000 miles away from the U.S. Northeast, Boston and New York, because it provided 3 new freedoms. Innovative freedom, because new technologies being developed and applied there were less likely to compete and intrude on the patents of East Coast giants. 2, geographical freedom. You could build homes and companies wherever you wanted to on the San Francisco Peninsula. There was little or no zoning. And 3, professional freedom. You could easily move from company to company since non-compete agreements were disallowed in California, officially since 1941. So given these factors in a feedback loop, a positive feedback loop that has lasted over a century, more startups attracted more entrepreneurs who created more startups and so on, giving rise to the huge innovation ecosystem we see in Silicon Valley today. But today, things are changing and have changed over the last decade. Property rights and the ability to innovate are being curtailed in Silicon Valley. New zoning and construction restrictions make housing and office space ever more expensive. Generous social services have attracted the homeless and drug addicts from far and wide to San Francisco. California state taxes, among the highest in the U.S., are driving many entrepreneurs and businesses out of state. So where are those who leave San Francisco going? Well, the single one destination is Texas. Texas has no state income tax, has a much lighter regulatory environment. A house that costs $450,000 in California costs $250,000 in Texas. So Silicon Valley will surely continue to grow, but this growing exodus is not a good sign. I think of it as the canary in the coal mine. Many countries, probably also Moldova, talk about creating Silicon Valleys. If anything, they should be talking about creating Texases. Well, in fact, both Silicon Valley and Texas have many geography-specific aspects that can't be copied directly. So what can Europe and Moldova do? Well, here are some thoughts. I'll offer 5 suggestions. Number 1, special economic zones. How many of you are familiar with the term special economic zone? SEZ, raise your hand. Okay, many of us. So an SEZ, there are many different types of them, but they generally feature lighter regulations and taxes than other regions. If you can't get lighter taxes and lighter regulation approved for the entire country, maybe you can get them approved or agreed to for just a region of the country. Great, that's a start. China has used SEZs very effectively, most notably Shenzhen. Have all of us aware of Shenzhen, China, where so much technology has come from? Shenzhen today is a booming metropolis of 15 or 20 million people. Just 25, 30 years ago or so, it was a fishing village. It shows you how powerfully special economic zones can transform a region. Incidentally, there are many types of these zones. For example, in Japan, they have a special economic zone focused specifically on drone development, where drones are allowed to fly in that region for development purposes, and people understand that that's okay. And that's a good thing too. So whatever the relaxation of regulation is, that could be the basis of your SEZ. So start by creating SEZs in the most economically depressed regions of Europe. The government commitments must be on the order of decades, not merely years, to persuade entrepreneurs that they're not bait and switch gimmicks to get them to move and start businesses elsewhere. But if the commitments are genuine and long-term, watch how quickly entrepreneurs and investors transform these blighted areas. SEZs make visible how much better life can be with less regulation. And expect other cities and regions then to clamor for similar treatment. Okay, so that's a first idea. Number 2, track the net number of entrepreneurs who are created in or move into Moldova. This is a telling but overlooked performance metric, and it can be measured at any level, at the country level, at the regional level, or the department level. By net, I mean subtract out from the total number of entrepreneurs who quit entrepreneurship or leave Moldova. My guess is that for Moldova, this metric is negative. That is, more entrepreneurs are leaving Moldova than are being created in Moldova. So here's a question. Whatever the metric is, negative, positive, 0, what can Moldova do to make it more positive? Without a continuous supply of entrepreneurs, economic growth will be limited and short-lived. So right now, entrepreneurs all over the world are saying where we really need to be is in Silicon Valley. What would it take to get them to say where we really need to be is in Moldova? So here's a third thought. Keep top-down EU regulation as lightweight as possible. The EU's original mandate was to ensure 4 freedoms: free movement of goods, services, capital, and people. This is a worthwhile, noble goal, worth fighting for. Creating larger areas in which people can engage in win-win interactions, both economically and socially, enables greater prosperity overall and long-term for everyone. Ensuring these four freedoms is hard enough, especially with xenophobia, that is fear of strangers, and it requires constant education. So let the EU ensure these four freedoms and not attempt to reach beyond them, whether into gun control, tax rate harmonization, forcibly redistributing wealth. All of these put achieving the four freedoms at still greater risk. So keep EU regulation as lightweight as possible. Next, use organic rather than imposed regulation. What do I mean by that? I've written extensively on what types of regulation promote and what types suppress entrepreneurship, innovation, and economic growth. And I have an article on it which Barbara has a copy of. And Barbara, if you would pass the article around, at the bottom of the first page is the link where you can download a free copy of that article if you wish, as one example. Well, when we think of regulation, what do we usually think of? We usually think of statutes, regulatory agency, promulgations, and executive orders. I call these imposed regulations. Well, we forget that societies and economies are already regulated organically by customs, markets, private agreements, and common law. Organic regulation relies on liability and responsibility, and it thus allows experimentation while providing protection from harm to others. In contrast, imposed regulation relies on penalties and prohibitions that discourage or disallow innovation. The greater use Europe and Moldova can make of organic regulation, the fewer unintended consequences, the fewer public choice concerns, and the less gaming of the system. So if you like, we can talk about that more during the Q&A and the discussion. And finally, use the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index as a management tool. How many people here are familiar with the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index? Raise your hand. Okay, some of us. Well, this is a really useful tool, so go online and take a look. What the index does is it ranks 190 countries and regions around the world from number 1, the easiest to do business there, to number 190, the hardest to do business there. And they rate it along 11 different criteria, like how easy is it to get electricity, to get title to property, to pay taxes, and so forth. Well, France is 32, Netherlands is 36, Moldova is 47. So what can Moldova do to improve its ranking? The World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index gives you a roadmap. It tells you how you rank on each of those 11 different criteria. So you can see where you're doing well, and you can see where you most need to improve. Sadly, Moldova ranking has fallen from 44 to 47 in recent years. So an aggressive, achievable, and measurable goal for Moldova, or for that any country in the world, is to cut your rank in half in the next 5 years. It's a goal that you can do. India cut its rank from 130 to 100 in 1 year. If India can improve by 30 places in 1 year, Moldova can improve by 24 places in 5 years. Doing this will benefit every single person living in Moldova, not just the entrepreneurs and business people. Well, those are 5 specific suggestions for Moldova inspired by my life and career in Silicon Valley. Now go make it happen. Napoleon said, until we spread our wings, we have no idea how far we can fly. Let's go fly. Mulțumesc. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. And Karl-Peter, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here again in Chisinau. I have a kind of special relationship with Moldova because I covered political affairs of this country for nearly 10 years. So I knew most of the politicians, couple of prime ministers, presidents, foreign ministers, and so on. But looking at the last elections, the outcome of the last election in this country, I'm very happy that I retired last year and I have not to continue to cover political affairs now in Moldova. There is a puzzle about Moldova. You have a smart, intelligent population, and those people vote for a completely corrupt, inept, and criminal political class. So if there is anybody who could explain me this puzzle, how this could happen, I would be very grateful, because I don't have an answer, even knowing that about 20% of the population, most of them very smart and intelligent people, already left this country. So the argument I will talk about is not Moldova, but the European Union. And I would also like to put a question, or let's say make a small referendum among us. My question would be, who is in favor of Moldova entering the European Union? Please raise your hands. Who is against Moldova entering the European Union? And who doesn't care? The rest. Interesting, because everybody would expect that this is the hottest question in Moldova. It seems not the case. Well, I want to talk about the European Union and the power structures inside the European Union, because if we talk about the European Union and you ask people who are the most powerful people inside the European Union, the answer would probably be Angela Merkel or Emmanuel Macron. In reality, I think the much more important person is the President of the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi. So I will focus your attention on Mr. Mario Draghi. There are not elected politicians, but technocrats of central banks and international financial institutions who are on the top of the global power pyramid. The native Roman, Mario Draghi, was born in 1947 in Rome, who once described himself as a liberal socialist, completed his doctorate in 1970 at the Roman University La Sapienza. In his doctoral thesis on economic integration and exchange rate changes, he criticized Pierre Werner. Pierre Werner, already forgotten, he was a prime minister of Luxembourg and the first man who proposed the introduction of a common European currency. After completing a postgraduate degree at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Draghi taught at several Italian universities until the socialist government of Bettino Craxi sent him to the World Bank as executive director. He then became Director General of the Italian Ministry of Treasure, and after a 3-year interlude with Goldman Sachs in London, he became governor of the Italian Central Bank, La Banca d'Italia. Draghi has been president of the European Central Bank since November 2011. This was his career. In a sharp polemic that appeared last year under the title The Draghi Crisis, the German lawyer and finance scholar Markus Kerber accused him of nurturing the self-image of a sovereign dictator. Under Draghi's leadership, the European Central Bank is shifting the Italian debt burden to the countries of the Eurozone, especially to Germany, and is thus thwarting the much-needed radical reorganization of public finances and banks in Italy. A few weeks ago, on February 22, the Faculty of Law of the University of Bologna, the oldest university in Europe, awarded Mario Draghi an honorary doctorate. The ECB president rarely speaks out on questions outside his area of responsibility. The more attention deserves the lesson he delivered in Bologna. Under the title, Sovereignty in a Globalized World, he argued against the view that the European Union receives its sovereignty from the nation states. This idea is biased, he said, because it confounds independence with sovereignty. Genuine sovereignty, Draghi said, consists in doing what the citizens need, not what they want. From Draghi's point of view, the supranational institutions don't need a sovereign. Their sovereignty simply consists in doing what they do. And they know better than anyone else what has to be done. I am Austrian. You probably know the Austrian Emperor Joseph II, who reigned from 1765 to 1719, on the height of the era of enlightenment, expressed himself much more concisely than Draghi. The emperor put his bureaucratic, centralistic reforms under the motto, Alles für das Volk, nichts durch das Volk, meaning everything for the people, nothing by the people. Like an enlightened monarch, Mario Draghi too claims for the supranational institutions the right to rule through without having to go through the arduous process of the reconciliation of interests. When the emperor fought against the resistance of the estates, the technocrats in the European Union tried to free themselves from elected politicians who occasionally stay in their way. Flexible forms of intergovernmental cooperation, Draghi said, are not enough to meet new challenges. In his view, the European Central Bank could only carry out its tasks during the euro crisis because its extensive power of decision made it possible to use untried instruments. Neither a fixed monetary policy, nor the already tested tools of central bank interventions would have been sufficient. Today, Draghi said, Europe faces threatening geopolitical changes which require institutions that can shoot. Old rules should not stand in their way. Sorry. According to the Draghi doctrine, the sovereignty of nation states is rooted in supranational institutions that know best what to do in the interest. The sovereignty of supranational institutions is rooted in people that know best what to do in the interests of the citizens. With the same argument, however, one could also replace the democratic procedures in the nation states by technocratic governing. We all know that democracies do not guarantee the best results, but we also know that their worst outcomes are still better than the worst outcomes of all other regimes, because they have been revised without the need to use violence. Maybe Draghi underestimates the political resistance to his plan to subordinate elected politicians to non-elected technocrats in supranational institutions. The concept of state sovereignty, whose history has survived different sovereignties since the 16th century, is rooted much deeper in the collective mind of the Europeans than the confidence in democracy. The Europeans will not accept technocratic rule without a legitimizing sovereign. European parties which are condemned as nationalists, but in reality are sovereignists, campaign against the bureaucratic centralism of the European Union. Emmanuel Macron's recent letter to the Europeans and the answer of the chief of the German Christian Democratic Party, the new chief, follower of Angela Merkel, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, show, however, that even 100% European politicians have a different view of sovereignty than the technocrats. Macron wants to strengthen France and to reshape the European Union in the spirit of French centralism and etatism. The new CDU chairman rejects Macron's plan, but she also emphasizes that the refounding of Europe cannot do without the nation states. I quote, "They create democratic legitimacy and identification. It is the member states that formulate and bring together their own interests at the European level. Only then does the international weight of Europeans emerge." The world of European politics is full of illusions and self-deceptions. Whatever politicians think and want, the ECB president, formerly only primus inter pares among 19 governors of the national central banks, has tremendous power. The central bank is not only protected against political influence, but it's also not subject to the European Court of Justice. Under Draghi's presidency, the ECB pumped about 400 billion euros into the money cycle to full growth and reach its self-imposed absurd inflation target of 2%. It has by no means mastered the credit crunch, and the ECB has only covered it with ever lower interest rates and a huge flood of money. Draghi and co. are of the opinion that the market-driven interest rates are neither compatible with the exigencies of the economy, nor with the exigencies of the over-indebted states. They think they know better as the markets. The outcome until now was thoroughly negative. With new, cheaper loans, borrowers could finance their maturing loans, preventing defaults, and the debt carousel continued to turn. The expansion of the money supply reflects itself in rapidly rising stock prices and real estate prices. Living becomes more and more expensive in the European Union. Saving is no longer worthwhile. One lives on tick, people do not save for old age, the dependence on the welfare state increases. As early as March 2016, the key interest rate had reached zero. The more the debts of the states and the privates grow, the less likely the European Central Bank will increase the interest rate. It is a doom loop. The ECB self-empowerment means that the zero and negative interest rate phase continues in the euro era. The central bank is thus fooling the next monetary crisis it claims that it is able to prevent. When this crisis comes, and given the downturn in the Eurozone economy, that could be very soon, she will have shot off her powder. You cannot continue a policy of easy money indefinitely. The foreseeable next step into monetary hell are negative interest rates on private accounts to postpone the collapse of the credit pyramid. In the process, central banks, both in the European Union and in the United States, are becoming more and more annoyed by cash beyond their knowledge and control. For years, bankers and economists have called for its abolition under the pretext of fighting tax evasion and money laundering. That does not impress the digitally upgraded gunners, drug dealers, and terrorists, but the less cash there is, the easier it will be to access our savings. The 500 euro note has already been abolished. As I hear in the United States, they talk about getting rid of the $100 bill. More and more countries are lowering the limits on cash transactions. ATM fees are another incentive to use paper money instead, to use digital money instead of paper money. But there is resistance. The long queues in front of the Greek ATMs during the Euro crisis are all too well remembered. According to a report of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, the number of circulating $100 notes since the financial crisis has even doubled. Should central banks break the 0% interest barrier, people would hoard more banknotes. A negative interest rate of 5% would mean, for example, that 100 euros in an account after 1 year are only worth 95 euros. Savers would then take their money out of the banks and put banknotes under the mattresses. They would continue to lose value through inflation, but at least they could escape the negative interest rate in this way. Economists from the European Central Bank and the IMF are therefore considering how to block the flight into cash. They plan to devaluate paper money in the amount of negative interest rates. Who in this example brings his 100 euro bill after 1 year to the bank to make a transfer would get only 95 euros credited. You could then go in dollars or in Swiss francs, and big investors will always find ways to invest their money, but the road to the monetary expropriation of the small savers who have already been damaged by the ECB current zero interest rate policy is predetermined. Mario Draghi's mandate will end in October 2019. Some hope that Jens Weidmann, the head of the German Bundesbank, will succeed him. How high Weidmann's chances are will be seen at the earliest after the vote to the EU Parliament and the election of the new President of the European Commission. The danger that Draghi's monetary policy will survive its originator is certainly real. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Karl-Peter. We have some minutes for questions and comments. I want to start, John, if I may. I just want to start with a question for you. You, as an entrepreneur and a very experienced entrepreneur, imagine you had some sort of business that could be outsourced to a country like Moldova. Which are the tick box what are the things that the country should fill in order to become interesting and do the business here?
Okay. Well, actually, I am involved with a company who has outsourced some of their software development to a team here in Moldova. So I think for most companies, probably the number one and two considerations are the skills of the team who are doing the work, and two is the cost of the labor. And so if you can find software developers, in the case of my industry here, who are skilled in Pascal or Ruby on Rails or whatever the language is that we're using, great. And if the cost is sufficiently, the cost delta for the labor is sufficiently large, the difference between labor costs in the U.S. and labor costs here, to compensate for the extra hassle required to deal with a development team that's, in 9 hours away from Silicon Valley and having to sometimes deal with communication bandwidth, which is limited, and all the other challenges that sometimes arise in dealing with geographically distributed teams. Then if the savings is sufficiently great, then people will do it. So anyway, those are two factors. How many software developers do we have here? None. Okay. Well, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Anyone who would like to ask a question? We need some courageous. Until we have 5 questions, nobody will leave. Fantastic. We have one
This lady
back there.
Hello, everyone. My name is Diana, and I'm from Faculty of International Economic Relations. And my question will be for Gloria. So, in your opinion, was the fall of Berlin Wall in early 90s and of totalitarian regime an incentive for other countries to fight for their freedom? Thank you.
When you say our countries, which ones do you refer to?
Other countries.
Other?
Yes.
Okay, so in my region, in Latin America, when the Berlin Wall fell, we already had a Marxist experiment, which was Cuba, right? So in the 90s, when with all this fuss that, communism was over and Bono was singing One Love and everyone thought, it was the end of history. Francis Fukuyama wrote a book about it. Fidel Castro was reorganizing how to reinvent communism after the Soviet Union. So we passed from the strategy of Marxist guerrillas, which were in place in Guatemala, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Uruguay, Argentina, Colombia, Peru, to a new strategy. Because he knew that without the money of the Soviet Union, he had to find new resources. And also, democracies started to get into place. We passed from being military dictatorships, which, give a very good excuse to have a Marxist guerrilla, to become democracies. So in the middle of the 1990s, when everyone in the world was celebrating the end of communism, in Latin America, they gathered together in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and they celebrated the Foro of Sao Paulo, the first of all of them. They reunite every year. And then they decided to rechange the strategy. Think of socialism as Frankenstein, right? How are we going to rebuild this monster? And so they did. And how they did it is they knew that democracy was the new game to play. Instead of having guerrillas go into the mountains with rifles, you had to win elections. And they start preparing themselves. And the first president that they put in place was Hugo Chavez in 1998 in Venezuela. And he came up with this brilliant idea of socialism of the 21st century. Like if you put 21st century on it, it's going to be something different. It's the same crap. And after him, you had Lula and Dilma in Brazil, the Kirchners in Argentina, Correa in Ecuador, Ortega in Nicaragua, the FMLN in El Salvador. You had Evo Morales in Bolivia, Bachelet in Chile. I mean, these guys, they were more successful using democracy with this new branding, talking about branding, instead of the guerrillas. So in other countries, the fall of the Berlin Wall in my region, it's, of course, for freedom fighters, a reminder of the disastrous that this thing was. But you have to take into mind that Cuba is so romanticized. you know? So for the region that I come from, I believe that socialism is still sexy. And in the case of Europe, I believe that Western Europe, since they didn't live in their own flesh and blood the disaster of the Soviets, they love to, you know, talk about socialism. But in Eastern Europe, when I've been in Czech Republic, in Hungary, in Estonia, what I see is that because they lived it in flesh and blood, they are more pro-markets and pro-freedom than in Western Europe.
Thank you. I have one question to Karl-Peter. Given your experience and you know and your close contact with this country in particular, do you think a possible scenario for Moldova would be to enter the European Union and try to transform itself in a country similar to Estonia or Ireland, the most, you know, small, not that large countries, and which are the most liberal in the Union?
Well, if you compare the situation in Moldova with Romania, so I've been covering both countries, and if you would ask me whether I prefer to live in Moldova or in Romania, I probably would decide to live in Romania. Why? Because the first question, which has to be resolved for every nation before anything else is discussed, is security. If you don't have security, you cannot have rule of law, you cannot have investments, you cannot have free business and all the other things. So this security has to be guaranteed. And the problem with Moldova is that one of the effects of the Transnistrian case, of the continuous involvement of Russia in the affairs of this country, is that the security is not given. No? So the question is not whether the European Union or NATO are ideal and liberating societies, organizations, but the question is simply for a country, what is now better? I am better off in this situation in the European Union and in NATO or not? No? And definitely, when I started to write about countries in this region, this was in the, I remember the 90s in Romania, before the reform started, before the country entered the European Union. It was terrible, because it was even the Ukraine in the beginning of the 90s was better off than Romania. You know? So it was really a house of poverty. Yeah? Then it changed, and first the socialists with wrong intentions did the right things, in the sense that they started the process of preparing the country to European NATO, to NATO and European Union. Then the conservatives continued with that, and now you have a government which I don't want to express me. We cannot say what I really think about these people, because maybe I could be put in jail for that. But it's terrible. But what happens in the meantime is that you have a society which developed. So the interesting thing in Romania is not the political class, which is corrupt until there. But the interesting thing is the social process is going on in the country, the economy going on, and all the things can only happen if you have security. And I think the problem of Moldova is that the security is not given, no? And it's a pity to see even many Romanians left the country. No? So all countries in the whole region are losing the most valuable thing they have, their brains, no? Because the brains are moving outside, yeah, where they have better possibilities to develop, and that's the big problem. No? Is that I always meet people in Moldova who say, no, exactly because the situation is so terrible, I will remain here and change the things, but it's terribly difficult. It's really difficult.
Thank you very much. James?
Hello, I'm James Sproul. I'm an economist living in London. I have both a comment and then a question. And my comment is one that was brought up earlier, which is about should Moldova join the European Union. Now, the UK obviously has a lot to say about whether the European Union is a good thing or not. And I'll try and be even-handed here. What would Moldova gain from joining the European Union? And I think there are positive things to gain, particularly if you're already a relatively poor country and one that hasn't attracted a lot of investment. So the first thing that you would gain would be investor confidence, because right now, investors, frankly, would look at it and say, I don't trust Moldovan laws, but if you adopt European Union laws, I can trust you, and therefore, then that is an enormous advantage. When you're trying to attract investment and when you have very little of it, this is a huge advantage. So I think that has to really be factored into what would happen. Set against that, I think there's a couple of other things. One is that Eastern Europe in general has a real problem with migration. That's not migration of people in particularly, it's you're losing your youth. And the easier you make it for your youth to flee, the more of them that will flee. We have seen in the last 4 or 5 years, Eastern European migration really starting to accelerate. It was actually on the Free Market Roadshow a couple of years ago when I was in Zagreb that I first became aware of what was going on here. Frankly, ladies and gentlemen, if you are losing all the people in your 20s, your economy will go nowhere, absolutely nowhere. You cannot have a vibrant economy that actually creates jobs and opportunities with no young people. And that's the way the Eastern European is going right now, and that is an enormous problem. So these freedoms that the European Union hold up is in fact a freedom for Eastern Europe to slowly empty of people, and that is a real chronic challenge for you, and I don't know what the solution is. The final thing I would just say about the European Union is, look at the long-term model that the European Union has right now. Is this the model economically that is going to be prosperous in the future? Is the European social model, which is a good degree of social spending, and it tends to be pretty sclerotic, it tends to be extremely difficult to reform, is that the model which is going to be appropriate for your economy, for your country, for my country, in the longer term? Do we think that the world is undergoing a lot of change right now, which I would say that we are, actually an unprecedented degree of change, and the way that lawmakers need to change the rules needs to reflect that? But the European Union is very bad at changing those underlying laws. So just be very careful if you want to go to the European Union. There are good things, but there are also some big challenges. Now I have a question which comes on, actually, the final presentation talked a lot about monetary policy, which is something I think is both extremely important and I realize actually isn't very interesting. I realize that monetary policy is one of those things that when I talk about it, my audience usually goes to sleep pretty quickly. And I'm not sure that this is going to be all that different. But we have an enormous debt bubble. It is not something in the UK or just Germany or just Italy. It's everywhere. It's both in the US, it's in Japan, it's across the European Union. This is heading for an enormous crash. I'm afraid that this government-inspired debt bubble is going to be blamed on capitalism. And you see, the problem, of course, was that we weren't interventionist enough. And if only we have more government, the ones that brought us the debt bubble to begin with, we will solve the problem. And I wonder, how do we both get out of the debt bubble and make it as painless as possible, because it's going to be painful, but as painless as possible, and also how do we reinvigorate the idea that it's going to be free markets that are going to be the answers, rather than yet more government?
Very short answer. Abolish the central banks.
Maybe that's where blockchain can come in.
The Austrian School of Economics came in also quite a long time because of that.
Well, the blockchain makes the Austrian solution possible.
Yeah, definitely. One more question? Fantastic, please.
Hello again. My name is Anna, and I would like to ask. Nowadays, Europe is very excited and is romanticizing Soviet Union, socialism, and communism. And how do you think will it somehow affect our future? That the youth, it depends on the youth, actually. Our future depends on youth, which is excited about socialism and communism. And what will happen? How do you think?
I would like to contribute with that. I think that the role of young people in Eastern Europe is crucial because you guys, sometimes adults say, how come millennials are socialist? Well, there's two reasons. First, education is indoctrination from the state, and the state is interested in people to be socialist because if you have a socialist mentality, you're going to vote for the leaders that can go to government and with corruption steal your money. If you have an education that teaches you liberalism and Austrian economics, you're going to vote for the politicians that are going to have to limit the state, and then they cannot steal. So as you see, there's a complete correlation in between politicians interested in indoctrinating education, right? This is what's happening in Western Europe. This is what's happening in the United States with all this craziness of political correctness and Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, which I think that if her great-grandmother could wake up from her tomb and tell her, don't be stupid, we came to this country precisely because we were running away from socialist disasters, right? And now she's proposing socialism as an alternative to the United States. So if millennials are socialists, it's because of two things: indoctrination, and because also the adults haven't made their jobs of telling them about history. The fact that I'm standing here with you guys is not only because I studied Austrian economics and in a libertarian university, but because I had Cuban grandparents who taught me what are the dangers of losing freedom. So you guys, the millennials and the centennials and whatever generation comes next from Eastern Europe, you have a treasure that the Western Europeans young people don't have. You have your grandmothers, you have your grandfathers, you have your parents who can translate the history of what happened here. And then you can translate that into hashtags, into memes, into videos, into contents in social media. Because I think that the battle in Europe needs to be fought in the level of ideas in between the millennials of Eastern Europe, which is you guys, who actually have the knowledge of what happens when you go through communism, versus the Westerners, Europeans, who have never, suffered it in flesh and blood. And it would be so interesting to see that battle of ideas. I think that that is an amazing opportunity. And what I see also when I travel to Eastern Europe, Romania, Hungary, Estonia, as I said, is the amount of brightness. You guys read more, you invest more in really going to the depths of contents, things that are getting lost in the more Western world.
Thank you very much. Karl-Peter, would you like to add anything, or I'll go to the next question?
A few words regarding confidence, migration, and election results, no? Because those things go together. People leaving the country, they don't only live, because this is the general explanation is you earn much more money in Italy than in Moldova, and you have the possibility, if you go there, you're better off. Well, first of all, in most cases, it's an illusion, because life there is very hard, and it's enormous. It's an enormous burden to be an immigrant and to insert oneself in a new society where you don't even speak the language and so on. No? That's not the problem. I don't think that the people leave it only for money. They leave it also for money, but the real reason is, and that's much more tragic, because they lose the confidence in the survival of their own country. Yeah? Because if I don't see any changes for the better, no improvement for years and years and years, and I see only people stealing and corruption increasing and services always worse. Yeah? If I have this experience, then I lose the confidence that the things could go better, and then many people leave simply the country. Why now? What has this to do with the election results? Because only if you have confidence that the situation would improve, no, I could give my vote to a party where I have the impression that they could do something which is good for the country. I have the impression that this confidence no more exists in Moldova. So they don't think that the party would be able to change things for the better. So then, what does the election? Why should I go to the elections? Well, it's quite easy, because you know that these mighty and very wealthy people who take their money from whatever resources, outside or inside the country, mostly of stealing and robbing and whatever, give a little bit of the money that they have robbed and stolen back to the people, and then they lower prices in some shops where pensioners could buy, let's say, bread or milk for a lesser price than in market shops. Yeah? So it's a terrible, depressing outcome. It's terribly depressing, because it's the political, let's say, affirmation, a political affirmation of a tragedy, yeah? of a situation without a future. And that's the astonishing and the really, really sad story about Moldova.
Thank you very much. Two quick announcements. Firstly, Rodica's question will be the last one, because we are running out of time. And also, last call for social media posts for our competition for John's book. So you have a couple of minutes still if you want to get the book. Rodica, please.
Yeah. Hello to everyone. My name is Rodica Crudo. In fact, the last statement of Karl-Peter was somehow meeting my question. However, just a feedback to what I have been stated. Do you think there is no possible progress without trust? That's one question, and that's something for you to think about and help us think about in-between countries. I mean, countries that were sometimes in their history were put in front of either war trap. I mean, specifically the case of Ukraine, yeah, when they were negotiating and signing the association agreement, the CFTA, they are put in troubles. Russia saying most of the time you have to choose between you or us. And that was the tool were used not only in case of Ukraine. Moldova faced a lot of embargoes for our trade. Do you think there is a solution or a recommendation for in-between countries to overcome this challenge and to ensure and to foster the economic progress and economic cooperation in these countries? Thank you.
The short answer is no.
To the first question.
To the second question.
To the second, okay.
What the first one?
Do you think that we can have development and progress in Moldova without trust?
No. This is what I said before. No, I mean, if you don't build up trust inside your country, no. Trust, that means also in let's say in every kind of commercial transaction. Yeah? You need to be sure that if you deliver a service or a good or whatever, that you get paid for that, for instance. And not that if you make, for instance, this is one of the things I always heard in Moldova when I talk to the people and to business people, is that we deliver goods to the government and they simply don't pay. Yeah, they just simply don't pay. That's it. Yeah? And that's even if you work for oligarchs, no, so you can't be sure, yeah, that you get anything back for what you do. No? So there is this, let's say, elementary trust that has to be created. But you can have elementary trust only in a situation where there is a rule of law, where you don't have a justice sector controlled by an oligarch, for instance. Because whenever a problem occurs, and you go to a judge and you can't be sure whether he takes the money from the other side, I mean, whom can you trust? So I'm sorry that I'm so pessimistic, but I think it would be useless. It would be useless to not to tell you the things as I see.
John, 30 seconds, or you're fine. 30 seconds.
I would say if with your neighbors there's no trust, go find new partners. Maybe when one of the advantages that Moldova is not in the EU is that you can make free trade agreements unilaterally with countries that actually are also eager to get out of socialism, like right now Bolivia or Argentina or Venezuela or even Guatemala. I mean, if in your neighbors you don't find trust, go out, be creative.
One of the things I say in my book is, with trust, anything is possible. Without trust, anything is an obstacle.
Fantastic. And speaking of John's book, has anyone made posts on 1,000 posts on social media? No. Okay, less than 1,000, but I think that gentleman, I think it's sold to that gentleman. I saw him tweeting all the time. And, sir, you won a book. Congratulations. It will be...
How many postings?
Yeah.
Wait,
okay, let's see.
How many postings does this gentleman?
How many did you do?
I made 5 stories in Instagram and 3 posts in Twitter.
Okay,
We're taking the total number, so that's like 8, right?
And you?
And this lady, how many does this lady have?
2 photos, 2 Instagrams, 2 stories, Insta stories, and 7 Facebook stories.
Oh, this is very...
We'll do both.
Anna, how many did you?
honestly, only 2.
Okay. We have 2 winners.
And Raima and Barbara, if you want to do the closing remarks and finish this officially, this fantastic event. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your patience to be here until to the end. But it's not the end. The invitation is open if you have interest to come from 2 to the European Resource Bank meeting. It's not about bankers or about resources. It's about human resources. It's about our minds, like we have here. How important it is to have free-minded. I hope even you here, young people, that you see some hope in Moldova to stay here. Somebody needs to run the country because these guys will not stay forever in charge and in power. And it's you and your generation who needs to take over the power from them to have and promote a free market economy and European values. Thank you to be here. Where is this?
Well, thank you from my behalf as well, not only to the speakers, but most importantly to you for joining us, for your active participation. And we would love to continue the conversation outside over food, and especially in the afternoon when we do the workshops. I'm sure most of you will still learn something. We, at least, the European think tankers, learn from each other. As you all know, it's about cooperation, coordination, division of labor, to advance, to elevate ourselves, and to become better and better in whatever we do. So, thank you once again. Also, thank you, Rodica. Thank you to Azem for hosting us again. Once again, great opportunity to meet and greet, and I always invite you to hand in proposals for becoming an intern and for making the world a better place. A libertarian, a pro-market, and a place where we can all prosper and live in freedom. Thank you.